Olá, Nação Ranger, tudo bem com vocês? Mais uma entrevista aqui no quadro Rede de Morfagem. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de agradecer pelo feedback super positivo, mega positivo nos bate-papos anteriores. Então a gente vai continuar trazendo pelo menos uma vez por mês ou uma vez a cada 2 meses um bate-papo mó fenomenal aqui no canal do Mega Power Brasil. E hoje, meus amigos, hoje nós teremos aqui um dos grandes nomes que já passaram por Power Rangers. Com certeza você já viu eu, Ana, Fred ou Lucas comentando sobre Jason Bischoff, ex-diretor de Planejamento Global em Power Rangers, ele que foi responsável junto com a Melissa Flores e o Brian Cassentini pelo universo expandido que a gente está acompanhando e gostando a cada dia. Mas antes de começar o vídeo de hoje, vou pedir para você que está aí do outro lado, se você caiu de paraquedas no Mega Power Brasil, seja bem-vindo, vem comigo nesse bate-papo, se inscreve aqui no canal, ativa o power sino das notificações e não esquece de deixar o power like. Toda vez que você deixa um gostei, você destrói um boneco de massa do Lord Zed e ajuda a salvar o mundo. Jason, primeiramente eu gostaria de agradecer por você ter aceitado o nosso convite. Seja bem-vindo ao Squad do Poder.
E aí, Mega Power Brazil, what's going on? This is Jason Bischoff, former director of Global Franchise for Power Rangers. Thank you so much for having me on. I have always loved the Power Rangers fandom down in Brazil, and it's so exciting to be a part of this, and it's so exciting to connect with all of you.
Antes de continuarmos com o nosso bate-papo, hoje irei sortear aqui um nome de um dos nossos apoiadores no Power Copo, a galera que faz parte do nosso projeto de financiamento coletivo, que é o APOIASE, vai estar aqui embaixo na descrição do vídeo para você conhecer esse projeto, onde você que está aí do outro lado pode ajudar a transformar o nosso centro de comando virtual em um centro de comando físico. Vamos ver quem vai apoiar o vídeo aqui de hoje. Deixa eu ver aqui, deixa eu mexer. Quem está apoiando o vídeo aqui de hoje é o Ayrton Serafim Balabem, ele está apoiando a entrevista com o Jason Bischoff. Lembrando mais uma vez, vai estar aqui embaixo o nosso link do Apoia-se, não deixa de conferir depois do vídeo. Jason, eu tenho uma curiosidade, como foi sua relação com a marca, com os nossos heróis coloridos, antes mesmo de você entrar na Saban? Você poderia contar um pouquinho pra gente como foi aí o jovem Jason lá na década de 90?
My fascination with Power Rangers actually starts several months before the show premiered in August of 1993. I was a kid, obviously, and I was running around a Toys R Us, and lo and behold, I stumbled across this 8-inch Red Ranger action figure sold in the original triangular box. And what was so fascinating to me about it was that I had just come off of a year of being obsessed with Jurassic Park. And so here was this superhero character, kind of dressed like a T-Rex, and lo and behold, his name was Jason, and that was kind of a big deal to me. So I bought that figure with my own money, and then on August 28th, 1993, saw the show premiere, and I guess the best way to say it is I was never the same. I never recovered. I have consistently watched the series and basically gobbled up anything that I could get my hands on since that day. So I've continued to watch the series year over year, and was very, very grateful to be a part of the team when I transitioned on in the winter of 2016. So it's always been a part of my life, and I hope that it will always be a part of my life.
Minha história com Power Rangers foi um pouco parecida com a sua. Jurassic Park e Power Rangers aí juntaram as duas coisas e estamos aqui hoje. Agora eu quero perguntar para você sobre seu trabalho dentro da Saban. Nós sabemos que o processo de adaptação de uma série Super Sentai para Power Rangers é um pouco complexo, né? Não é nada fácil como muita gente pensa aí pela internet, e eu queria saber como era seu trabalho na Saban e como foi esse lance de você estar tão próximo da comunidade de fãs, ouvindo eles o tempo inteiro.
So my time with Saban was very interesting and unique in that I had originally come in to help run the licensing and business development for the studio. And while that's very much so the case, and was the case for the several years that I was at Saban, my responsibilities kind of evolved and changed over time. So from a licensing and biz dev perspective, I oversaw things like the toys and collectibles and publishing and some of our video game initiatives, and helped kind of make those actual businesses, and reviewed the numbers and helped influence what was going on in the day-to-day. But on top of that too, while I was at Saban, I found some pretty incredible collaborators, particularly on the production side. So good folks like Brian Cassentini, Melissa Flores, and Paul Strickland, all three of which kind of started to tap me as a resource, as somebody who was, for lack of a better phrase, an in-house expert, a fan themselves who loved this stuff and could maybe help influence or shape some of the content that we were developing in real time. So through the years, my responsibilities changed a little bit in that, of course, I was always focused on the biz dev and licensing piece, but on the same token, I was being tapped as a resource as we developed content, particularly in things like our comic series, for example, which really helped expand the lore for the show. Outside of that, yes, I was somewhat involved from a brand ambassador standpoint, if you will, in doing a lot of social listening online and just getting a sense or maybe a pulse check of what the fans were really into or how they were reacting to the things that we were creating in real time. So I was engaging with the online community, not only because I was part of that community and I love that community and wanted to make sure that they felt like they had their voices heard, but on the same token, it was really valuable to us, to the kinds of things that we were chasing, because I could take some of that feedback and bring it in-house and we could discuss it in real time and sometimes shape the decisions that we were making. So there was a lot of fun and a lot of job diversification and responsibility in the time that I was at Saban. And again, I'm just hyper grateful that I found like-minded, open-hearted people in our production team. And on the same token, we got to do some really cool stuff because we were a small studio and we kind of had that flexibility to do that.
Além da série de TV, nós temos aí quadrinhos, jogos, vamos ter futuramente aí mais jogos de tabuleiro além dos jogos virtuais, tudo isso aí expandindo o universo de Power Rangers. Para quem acompanha sabe que o universo expandido de Power Rangers tem entregado pra gente ótimas histórias e eu queria saber de você, Jason, como foi seu envolvimento na construção do universo expandido de Power Rangers.
So Power Rangers lore has always been something that has fascinated me. I am that guy that for many years was digging around online and communicating in places like Ranger Board and trying to understand how the different seasons connected to one another, even outside of what was being presented in the show. Because that's one of the things that I absolutely love about the franchise, is that there's this endless desire to add more disparate elements to it. So it's magic and technology and time travel and dinosaurs, and it's really kind of the kitchen sink of cool stuff. So that was always exciting to me, to find what was the broader narrative that was interwoven or connecting all these pieces and parts. So when we had opportunities to explore that from a content perspective, whether it had been in the show or maybe in the comics or some of the other initiatives that we were doing at the time, that was always where kind of my heart was at, is I wanted to maybe answer a lot of our old questions that had been opened up in the franchise, but on the same token, ask a lot of new questions, or at least get the audience to ask some of those new questions. So in terms of how involved I was, I mean, I would say that I was pretty intimately involved. I was the kind of person that was always pushing for more. And I'm sure on occasion, I was rubbing shoulders with the production team, which again, they were wonderful people and they were so patient with me. But on the same token, I hope that we were a little bit in an iron sharpens iron kind of scenario, whereby they had their objectives and then I had one hat that was very much so focused on business and pushing the franchise forward. And then I sort of had a second hat in that, as a fan, I wanted to see where we could go and answer some of the old questions and raise some of the new ones. So I was very, very involved in developing, a lot of the characters and the concepts in some of the expressions that we were chasing at the time, like the Boom comic series. But I also want to heavily caveat that that wasn't just me. That was a whole chorus of incredible people, both inside the studio and outside the studio. And when I say outside the studio, I mean the good folks in New Zealand that are running the show, folks like Chip Lynn, right, our showrunner, or incredible writers and artists that were working on our comic series. I guess that's one of the things that really excites me most about my time at Saban, and then maybe for that year at Hasbro, is there were just so many incredible like-minded collaborators that were always looking to push the IP forward, and everyone was doing so with an open heart. So I was very involved, but no more involved than anybody else that was adding their A game to the franchise. And for that, I will be eternally grateful, because I will always be able to see our mark upon something that I have loved for my whole life.
Um dos personagens favoritos do Mega Power Brasil é o Psycho Ranger Verde. Sempre que dá um jeito, a gente comenta ele, seja aqui no canal ou no podcast, e eu sei que você tem um envolvimento especial com a criação do personagem. Você poderia contar um pouquinho pra gente como foi a história do Psycho Ranger Verde?
Okay, so guilty confession, Psycho Green is something that I have been obsessed with since originally combing the boards on Ranger Board and a number of other places through the years. There was a lot of speculation and honestly just kind of fun for well over a decade where people were speculating that there were other Psycho colors. So not too long ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago now, when we were developing the concepts and the characters for the Grace version, the 1969 version of the Power Rangers for issue 20, if I recall correctly, there was this big open question of what the monster was going to be, because it kind of had to be something that we hadn't seen before, and it kind of had to be something that was connected to some bigger lore in the universe. So I will admit that this was sort of one of those opportune moments where I saw the stars had aligned. I had been a fan obsessed with the Psycho Rangers for just about ever, and I had thrown out a pitch to first our production team and ultimately to Boom Studios of, hey, what if we were to introduce Psycho Green, a Psycho Ranger we had never seen before that was arguably the prototype Ranger that would create the characters that would then come thereafter. And it would kind of be a wink and a nod to a future season of Rangers, certainly a wink and a nod to hardcore fans, but could also kind of install some mystery and certainly some new lore around both Dark Spectre and the Psycho Rangers themselves. So I will admit, I was the one that originally proposed that idea for issue 20, but I will also say that I had some additional ideas about who Psycho Green was and wasn't that did not come to fruition that someday I hope to share with the fans.
Saindo dos quadrinhos para a série de TV com Power Rangers Beast Morphers, temporada atual, se você está assistindo o vídeo na data de lançamento, uma temporada que tem atraído vários olhares porque ela é bem completa, respeita a mitologia, tem vários easter eggs, tem um elenco bem cativante, e eu queria saber de você como foi o processo de criação de Power Rangers Beast Morphers.
Come say hi. This is our talkie boy. This is the guy that was talking just a few minutes ago. Sorry about that. So Beast Morphers is a really interesting product, and that's the one word that I really want to emphasize with the audience, is that it's a product, just like any television series or film. There are lots of different pieces and parts that go into making the decisions that ultimately create the shows that we see on our screens. Now, some of those decisions are business decisions, and some of those decisions are creative decisions, and there was a lot of that in collaboration that went into creating that season. So going back to the summer of 2019, at the time, Saban was transitioning out of our relationship between Bandai as the master toy and ultimately transitioning into our relationship at Hasbro, right? And, you know, that was very interesting because we had to make a lot of decisions around where the content was going to be going. And we also had to take into mind, or at least factor into mind, that we were going to be completely relaunching this series as we knew it. So we were in this kind of very interesting space where we saw Beast Morphers as an opportunity to add a bunch of new elements to the universe and to the lore, but also on the same token, because we were transitioning and because we were going to be developing the show kind of half outside Hasbro and half inside Hasbro, that we would have an opportunity to maybe answer a lot of older questions. So, you know, again, it's very interesting. The way I will say it though is it was hyper collaborative. There was an existing treatment that had been in the vault for several years. There were a lot of things that Hasbro was hoping to get out of the new season, not the least of which was kind of a fresh start and certainly new toyetic elements, things like the Beast X keys and some of that kind of stuff that we had to bake in. But on the same token, we had this really cool opportunity to not only visually redefine the Power Rangers universe, but again, kind of approach some of those bigger lore questions that we had been raising for a few years now in things like the comic series. So it was very complicated and not complicated at all. And what I will definitely say is there was a lot of excitement on all sides, both the people inside Saban Brands at the time and ultimately our partners at Hasbro. And when we transitioned over, or when some of us transitioned over, it made the continuation or the continued development of that series all that much more easy. I also do want to highlight the fact that you know, these things don't happen in a bubble. There are many people involved in creating a show like that. And if you like Beast Morphers, awesome. I'm super grateful that we were able to create something that has resonated so well with fans, answer some old questions. And on the same token, you know, I'm so appreciative of the fact that there were so many people that came into the decision making across production, from the overseas team in New Zealand, at Hasbro. Everybody kind of came together and saw a greater vision, and that's going to last the test of time. So that's sort of how Beast Morphers came to be, and ultimately it's how many or all seasons come to be, right? They are products of many incredible people, and when those incredible people are all singing the same song, it translates on screen.
Além de Power Rangers, eu sei que você já trabalhou com Mulher Maravilha da DC Comics. Como é trabalhar com essas franquias tão diferentes e qual a principal diferença na criação e na dinâmica de ambas as continuidades?
So this is a really interesting question. This is actually kind of getting at the heart of a lot of my different fandoms. I have been a DC Comics fan my whole life, arguably before I was a Power Rangers fan. And so, you know, in terms of the nature of these universes, they are different. They are built on different ideas, ideas even just kind of in the shape of what a normal life looks like in these universes. So when we had an opportunity to kind of bring these two universes together with our Justice League Power Rangers crossover, we had to be mindful of both worlds, literally and figuratively. But in terms of what kind of defines these things, it's interesting, and I can only speak as a fan. But for me, maybe we'll start with Power Rangers. Power Rangers is a universe, like I said earlier, that's built on so many different pieces and parts. Time travel and dinosaurs and technology and magic. But fundamentally, Power Rangers is it's a world that is built on much bigger ideas that transcend all of these themes. Themes like diversity and teamwork is probably a really key and defining element of that. And so there was always something very cool to me about the Power Rangers universe, in that not everyone was special, meaning at least the characters that we were experiencing the content through, namely or more often our 6 Rangers, they were unique, right? They were being indoctrinated, or they were our lens into a much bigger universe of trouble and cool and all sorts of other elements. But really at the end of the day, it came down to just 6 characters for the most part, if we're not talking about everything else that was happening from a villain or cosmic perspective, that kind of thing. So it always felt, for as much as Power Rangers is bombastic and over the top, it has always felt very intimate to me. And also felt like a mystery because of all these different elements and how they come together. DC is a different animal, and you know, that's one of the things that you have to respect when you approach some of these universes. So for me, DC has always felt, gosh, how do I say this? It's always felt very grand. And that's a reflection of not only the volume of characters that are occupying this world, because this world is populated with everyday superheroes and supervillains. And it's something that kind of every city on the planet has to deal with, or at least is witness to, right? But when I say grand, I mean, there are some very big themes in DC Comics characters, particularly in the Trinity of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, that transcend lifetimes in some cases. So like Wonder Woman, for example, is a character that is influenced by thousands of years of Greek history, right? And it's important that we call that out, because her present is as much influenced by her past as it is her present. There is an entire mythology, or there's a lore built around the characters that occupy her world. And so it's very interesting to me, at least, to see how those ancient influences change her life in real time today, and also spill over into the lives of characters that have nothing to do with that. So a perfect example, again, would be somebody like Superman, who comes from the cosmos, right? He comes from Krypton, and he's a character based in science. And suddenly we have characters that are thematically all about, I want to be clear. Superman is certainly all based in science, but really more than anything, Superman is based in small town values and heart, right? But the big idea here is that you have a character of science interfacing with a character of gods and monsters and ancient myth. And it's so interesting to see how not only these two characters converge and and influence one another, but ultimately how their broader worlds do as well. And so when you multiply that by a number of different families across the DC universe, like the Bat family, for example, or Green Lanterns, for example, it's really interesting to see the ebb and flow and the thematic ebb and flow of science and mythology and certainly time travel, and how these things are influencing a universe at a time, not just a micro story like Power Rangers, for as much as Power Rangers is also very grandiose. So it's just about respecting both universes, certainly loving both universes authentically, and then if and when you get those rare opportunities to combine those things, making sure that the combinations honor the parts as much as the whole.
No Twitter você está com um projeto chamado Power Down que tá dando o que falar. Já comentamos aqui no canal de Supernova e também da continuação de Power Rangers S.P.D. E eu queria que você contasse um pouquinho pro público o que é Power Down e se tem alguma história que você vai revelar um pouco mais na frente.
So Power Down is this new initiative I'm just kind of playing with online or playing with socially. Really, it's neither here nor there. It's not important. It's just me having an opportunity to express some of those things or those stories or those characters that I never got a chance to do so during my time while working on Power Rangers. So that would be some of those like deep lore connections that I was hoping that we would have fleshed out, or kind of have always felt in my heart that the franchise has never formally answered, to revisiting some of the characters or some of the vision that I had originally had for some of these characters as they were being figured out in real time. Now, I do want to stress that for as fun and as exciting as Power Down is, it's not official in any way. I am by no means an expert. This is just me as a fan expressing the kinds of things that really geek me out about Power Rangers, and I hope that you and your audience get excited too, because we should be talking about these things. We should be talking about them in the way that apologists talk about Star Wars, right? Or what are those pieces of the lore that we don't know about, that we speculate about, that are hyper valuable and may answer some of the questions that we have as a fandom. So that's all Power Down is for me at least. It's answering some of the questions that I've always had, or maybe in some cases asking some of those questions.
Vamos agora para as perguntas rápidas. Qual o seu Ranger favorito? Sua temporada favorita? Qual série Super Sentai você escolheria para adaptar? E qual outra mídia que Power Rangers não explorou ainda que você gostaria de adaptar se tivesse o poder em suas mãos?
All right, let's do a fast round. So, my favorite Ranger of all time, that's a complicated question. It should be a complicated question for everybody. It kind of depends on who you're talking about in terms of like costume or powers or civilian identity. For me, I will answer in saying that my favorite civilian of all time is Zane from In Space. I just really love Zane. I think he's a joyful character that's not above pranking, but also is hyper reliable and certainly shoulders the responsibility that he has well, and is first and foremost a great friend, even going so far as to basically sacrifice his life for his best friend. So he's a wonderful character and I really love him. In terms of a favorite Ranger costume, I would have to probably point towards the original Mighty Morphin White Ranger costume. I think there's just something so emblematically cool about the composition of that design, the way that the faceplate works, even just the shape of Saba is super cool. So he'll always be visually my favorite Ranger. But if you're just talking in whole, my favorite Ranger, period, that would be the Phantom Ranger. So the Phantom Ranger, in my mind, has all these really kind of embedded, tricked out powers. Maybe I'll get into it at another time, but I also love the fact that he is a mystery, and it's that mystery that I'm fascinated with, and the things that I've kind of fleshed out in my mind make him all that much more exciting to me. Now, I will tease, at one time, I was asked formally by the production team who I thought the Phantom Ranger was. And I will tell you that I came up with 5 answers. So maybe the answer is all 5 of those answers, or maybe the answer is just one of them, but I do have a bunch of ideas about who the Phantom Ranger is, and on top of that, just why he excites me so much in the lore specifically. So he's my favorite Ranger. As for favorite seasons, I would love to say that it's Beast Morphers because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. The reality though is it's In Space. I think In Space was one of those seasons that surprised a lot of people, myself included, because it dared to answer a bunch of questions and maybe even formally mark an era in Power Rangers, right? So I absolutely love In Space. I think it's very grandiose. There's a lot of cool themes in that season, not the least of which is the idea that Andros was basically a loner who had to learn to be a teammate. That's a really interesting theme for Power Rangers, who's all about teamwork in general. But yeah, I love In Space. I love everything about In Space, and that's my favorite season. If I could adapt any season for Power Rangers, it would absolutely be Q Ranger. I recently did a little series of this on Twitter and on YouTube through TOKUSHOUTSU, where I adapted Q Ranger into this bigger idea called Power Rangers Supernova. So if you'd like to hear about that pitch and kind of what some of my ideas were, I would highly encourage you to check out TOKUSHOUTSU's YouTube page and check out that video specifically, which just dropped a few weeks ago. There's all sorts of stuff in there, and I would love to get your guys' thoughts about what you think about Power Rangers Supernova, but it would definitely be Q Ranger. So I'm not entirely sure how to answer this last question, but I'm gonna attempt to do my very best. So in terms of media not yet explored by Power Rangers that I would love to explore, that's the one thing that I really love about Power Rangers, is at least coming out of sort of that growth period in 2016 to 2019, we were doing lots of different things that were attempting to grow the universe through different pieces and parts, pieces of transmedia, if you will. So we were doing things on television, in film, in print, through YouTube, right, and through Twitch. We were doing these things in an attempt to weave a bigger story around those pieces and parts to excite people about the lore. In terms of media not yet explored by Rangers, wow, that doesn't really leave a lot, but I guess what I will say is I would personally love to see kind of an Arkham-style video game, something that's very, very deep cutting, that's very kind of third person, almost like that Batman Arkham City, that explores the themes of Power Rangers through a completely different lens, through an interactive lens. So I would probably want to do something around that.
Jason, foi um prazer imenso papear com você, nem vi o tempo passando, foi ótimo conversar. Quem sabe em breve não rola uma segunda parte comentando outros detalhes dentro do universo de Power Rangers. Muito obrigado mais uma vez, e a galera aqui do Brasil com certeza é fã do seu trabalho.
Hey, this has been absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on again. Like I said earlier, I have always loved our Brazilian fans. I have found you guys to be hyper excited, maybe even more so than some of the fans here in the United States. But I'm just so very, very grateful that you would welcome me into your community, and that you would be a part of the community that I've always loved and tried to build a little bit more, and are certainly being a part of today. So I guess my message to all of you is stay excited, get hype. There's so much cool stuff that's happening that sure I worked on, but there's lots more that's happening in the community that I think a lot of our friends and should be looking at, right? And even something like this. This is super cool that we have entire organized communities of people around the world that are contributing to a bigger idea. So really, my message to you is just thank you. Thank you for being so cool, and thank you for being fans that are adding something to what we can all enjoy as a fandom together. And with that, I say obrigado, and have a great day, everybody. May the power protect you. Bye!
E você aí do outro lado, o que achou do bate-papo com o Jason Bischoff? Deixa aqui na seção de comentários. Também não esquece de clicar nos links que estão na descrição, que falam sobre Supernova e sobre a continuação de Power Rangers S.P.D, caso você não saiba, para ficar 100% atualizado. E não esquece também de seguir a gente nas redes sociais, principalmente nosso Twitter, twitter.com/megapowerbrasil, e não esquece de conhecer o nosso projeto de financiamento coletivo, que é o apoia.se/megapowerbrasil, onde você pode virar um apoiador igual o Stefano Gollum, que está apoiando esse vídeo aqui de hoje. Nos vemos muito em breve e que o poder o proteja.